Hi guys, today I like to make a video and touch on HEX protocol and bond markets and how, in my opinion, the smart contract is closer to the bond market than the certificate of deposit. So, what is a bond market? That's the biggest financial place in the world, worth around $300 trillion, way above the $6-7 trillion of the certificate of deposits. So, let me explain what is the bond market. That's the place where investors are lending their US dollars to the US government to receive yield. So when you lend your dollars, you're receiving a treasury bill, that's a short-term lending, or bond, which is like for longer term lending. And when you lend your money for longer, you receive a higher yield. It is the same with HEX shares and T-shares. When you acquire more shares, lock more HEX tokens, you're receiving higher yield than if you lock your HEX for a short time. So T-bills and bonds represent shares and T-shares in HEX ecosystem. Other similarities is if you want to acquire T-bills and bonds, you need a US dollar bill. If you want to acquire shares or T-shares in HEX protocol, you need HEX tokens. So HEX is like the US dollar. Other thing, HEX token inflates 3.69% per year. The inflation cannot be changed because the smart contract is immutable and there is no admin key to change that. US dollar, the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of America, got target inflation of 2%. So, in order to achieve the 2% inflation, in my opinion, they shouldn't print more than 2% US dollars per year. But that's exactly opposite what we're seeing, because the inflation is well above 2%. I will not explain how the inflation is distributed to various financial institutions, but it's obvious we've got, even on paper, on their data, we've got higher than 2% inflation. So the Federal Reserve could change the inflation of the US dollar. That's not the case with HEX. What else the Federal Reserve could do? They could print US dollars and they could start buying treasury bills and bonds in order to reduce the yield for the investors, for the new investors. In HEX, we've got an origin address. It's an entity that owns around 85-90% of the tokens. And this entity could acquire shares and T-shares and also could change the yield for the stakers, people who locked their tokens. To be clear, this origin address can change the inflation on the token itself, while the Federal Reserve could do that. So the only thing that origin address can do is to lock the tokens and manipulate or adjust the yield other people, other stakers got. So if the origin address don't lock their HEX tokens, the yield is very high. when the origin address lock the tokens, the yield is getting less. But the difference here is, while the Federal Reserve is printing more and more money and the US dollar is losing value against all major assets, the HEX token is getting more scarce, because when the HEX token when the origin address lock his HEX tokens, he acquire a very high portion of the inflation. So now the stakers, the people who stake, they can't get the same amount of yield. So they can't sell their yield, right? And the main difference, you could say like, yeah, but it's the same like with bonds, because the investors, they're getting less yield. Yes, but in bonds, the Federal Reserve, they could still print more money and distribute them elsewhere, while the HEX tokens of the origin address, they are locked. They cannot be sold on the open market. It's very honest. It's a great system. It's one of the best, not one, it is the best smart contract built on the blockchain. It's running for 5 years. It's extremely secure, cannot be hacked, and it's very honest. We could see everything on chain, while we can't see everything what the Federal Reserve is doing, because they giving us a centralized data. They could lie to us. It's not a blockchain. They could manipulate the data. And yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, and if you like what I'm saying, you could share with your friends. I'll be very happy to see if some other people start doing videos, much better videos visually than the one we've got here, but at least the idea is more important in my opinion than the video quality itself. So bye for now, guys.